Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Vincent Turner joins me today, our co-host and founder. And Vincent, today on our Legend Show, we're going to talk about one of the guys that, in my opinion, helped change the game because he was what we would call a lifer. You may serve in the military for 2 years or 4 years, have a basic commitment, and move on with the rest of your life. God bless you. Football, the same way. Have a career, make it last as long as you can, and then you move on to something else in your life. Emmitt Thomas ends up being one of those guys that is completely committed to the National Football League, the American Football League, to college football as a player, as an assistant, as a head coach. What more can you ask from a young man that really loved the game and wanted to make it better and made an absolute commitment of his entire adulthood of being one of those guys that became a legend that we're going to discuss today. I am so grateful that you brought his name into the fold here, that we get a chance to highlight Emmitt Thomas today.
I think with Emmitt Thomas, there's certain players and individuals that come into the National Football League. We just don't know how much they are special. And one thing about Emmitt Thomas is that he performed at a high level on the field, Super Bowl champion with the Kansas City Chiefs, Super Bowl IV, and then his coaching prowess, where he coached several players that went into the Hall of Fame and became Super Bowl champions. But the one thing when I was researching Mr. Emmitt Thomas last night is that a lot of people don't give respect on his name. He had to be voted in, I think, a senior committee member to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Well, he should have just got in on his Murphs. Man, it's exciting today to talk about the young man from Bishop College out of Dallas, Texas. Not only one of the greatest individuals played the game, one of the greatest position players at the cornerback position, and one of the greatest coaches that's coached the game. Back to you, Hawk.
Well, Emmitt Earl Thomas, born on June 3rd, 1943. He is now 83 years old, born in Angleton, Texas, which is somewhere in between Houston and Galveston, and there's a little triangle. He's about 15 miles west of Galveston and Jamaica Beach, a little farm community. He goes to high school there, and I don't know much about his high school. I don't know if he was a basketball, baseball, track guy. I do know that he played football there, and he played well enough to end up going to Bishop College. You mentioned that just a moment ago. But the high school itself is no longer. It was Marshall High School, but now it's Angleton. It's kind of changed. As you can see, there's this little brick building that was a part of the high school back in the day when he went there. But I have to admit to you, there's not a whole lot of information, Vincent, so I don't know all that much about his high school, except the fact that he played well, he got noticed, and it wasn't a bunch of big colleges that were looking after him, but he found something about football that he loved and that he wanted to continue, and he ended up doing that at Bishop.
Well, look at his high school and look at the guys that followed him as he said, I want to say, set the tone for what excitement came out of his old high school. Rodney Terry, former head basketball coach at the University of Texas. I think at one time he was pretty good. Quentin Jammer, first round draft pick out of Texas that played with the San Diego Chargers. Armand Hall, who played in the league, and Gilbert Gardner, another NFL guy. So when you're looking at Mr. Thomas, there was something that he said and something in that water that came out of high school. But what I liked about him, he went to Bishop College. They don't even have a football program, even at this time. And he was able to come out of Bishop. Listen to what I'm finna say. An undrafted free agent. An undrafted free agent. Well, I believe back during his time, they had 22 rounds of the NFL draft at that time. So what it tells me, Mr. Thomas was very determined. And he proved what he did when he got with the Kansas City Chiefs. Back to you, Hawk.
Yeah, in 1961, he graduates from college. So in 62, he's at Bishop. He graduated from high school at Marshall, goes to Bishop, which no longer is a college or a university anymore. Unheard of. So 62 to 65, he plays there. He's about 6'2", In the pros, he's about 192, 95 pounds, somewhere in that range. So kind of tall and lanky. But let's be honest, nobody noticed him. But yet he ends up getting drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. And what a difference that made in his life. What I'm thinking of is the Lamar Hunt era of Kansas City. You've got Jack Stedman, who is the general manager of that team. And then you've got Lamar Hunt, who's the owner, senior. And the thing about that is interesting to me is the way that they looked outside the general box. They went outside of the Pac-8, the Big Ten, the SEC conferences, and they started looking for players all over the country that could play. They're looking for talent. And they somehow or another find this skinny little kid. They sign him to a contract. He makes the team. And in 1966, Vincent, they were 11-2-1. Okay, this is a good football team in Kansas City. And Hank Stram was putting together a roster that includes Mike Garrett, Lynn Dawson, Buck Buchanan. Willie Lanier's not there yet, but Fred the Hammer Williamson. There are some guys that can play right there. And they're outlaws, right? They're out there, they're playing and doing a great job. And Emmitt gets to be a part of that. Now, he wasn't a starter his first year, had to kind of work his way into the lineup, but great organization. Otis Taylor being another one of those perennial Pro Bowlers and future Hall of Famer. So excited for Emmitt to be a part of this organization. Right place, right time, and the beginnings of a fantastic career for him.
Well, I think that you brought up a good point, is that the Chiefs organization was really able to more or less go across the country and find talent. But let's be honest today, the talent that they really stuck their nose at was down here in the South, the HBCUs, the SWAC conference. And Emmitt Thomas was able to go in there with the Chiefs organization, play with some great players like Mr. Buchanan, like Gloucester Richardson, like Frank Pitts, like Robert Holmes, and the guy I talk about here all the time. At 6 years old, I saw him as a sophomore at Tennessee State, Mr. Jimmy Marcellus. So what you had a lot of schools across the country didn't really know what talent was in the HBCUs in the SWAC conference. But what I'm most really excited about while we're talking about Emmitt Thomas today, when you look at that Chiefs team and how it was constructed, they had the guy with the brains, engineer major, Lenny Dawson running the show. And then they had, as you just said, a guy from USC, Mr. Mike Garrett. So you got to give credit to Hank Stram and the general manager you just mentioned. I just forgot his name real quick. They were able to bring all those different personalities, different cultures to build a really outstanding football team. And that Chiefs team, when you look at it, the Super Bowl team in '69, they had to go through a real serious force out there in the Bay Area, the Oakland Raiders and Mr. Al Davis. But the reason I'm getting excited, out of all the teams, and I'm a Cowboys fan, but I'm going to be honest, the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl IV team is my most favorite team. The team I get up and think about every day. Back to you, Hawk.
Well, we get some great shots here of Emmitt and getting a chance to play, but here's one of the things that really sticks in my mind is that the Kansas City Chiefs were in Super Bowl I, even though they lost to the Green Bay Packers. And as everybody knows, Packers win Super Bowl I and II. And you mentioned the Raiders. The Raiders were the opponent in Super Bowl II, but Kansas City really making a name for themselves in the AFL. And Emmitt was a part of that, part of the great history. But as you mentioned there in the '69 Super Bowl IV, Super Bowl III was the difference maker for a lot of folks, where the AFL and Joe Namath and the New York Jets end up beating the invincible, one of the great teams of all time that we'll never talk about, because they lose Super Bowl III, the Baltimore Colts, and Don Shula was the head coach there. History changed. And so Kansas City goes up against an NFL roster in the Minnesota Vikings and absolutely destroys them in Tulane Stadium there in New Orleans, and it was the beginning of the change where the dominance of the AFL really made itself known. Younger, faster, better players were coming together in the AFL. So the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Bills, the Raiders. I mentioned the Raiders. Some of these AFL teams that survived, Houston being the other, that had a chance to play against the NFL talent. They had worked their way into being better qualified and better coached and better players, and they ended up dominating during a large portion of the early 60s, all throughout the late 60s, all throughout the 70s, and up until about 82, 83. So it was a great time for the AFL to really show what they had. Here's another picture here. You mentioned before we started, Emmitt had an interception here in Super Bowl IV. There's a couple of shots of him with that. He's really coming into his own and being one of those guys that is not only a great player on a great team, but the rest of the league started noticing. Pro Bowl appearances, getting a chance to go to Hawaii, if you will, being one of those guys that's highly recognized as not only an all-star, but a Pro Bowler.
When you look at all the great players that's played that position, and then you think about his run in the 70s, like, let's go back, like he had the interception, as we just mentioned. You mentioned the Super Bowl interceptions against the Vikings. But look at the playoffs that year. They knocked out the previous Super Bowl champions, the New York Jets. He picked off Joe Namath at the goal line in a critical part of the game. Then go back, he picked off Dale LaMonaco twice in the AFL championship game, and then in the Super Bowl. He had 4 interceptions during that playoff run. But most of all, when you think about Emmitt Thomas, and this is what I take from him. You take from him a young man out of Bishop, skill set, very confident, A+. He had the instincts back then, and any better corner playing at that time, A+. His ball skills were off the chain, A+. He played press man better than anybody during that time. And then the one point I brought up before the show today, when the Chiefs merged, and after that Super Bowl season, they won the Super Bowl in 70, he made all pro, I want to say 72, 74, 75. That's why I go back to my first comment. Why did he not get voted into the Hall of Fame from the start? But that's another topic to discuss. But when you look at all the great players that played the cornerback position, the first words come out of our mouth as being the greatest is Darryl Green, Deion Sanders, Lynn Barney, Lester Hayes, Mike Haynes. But nobody brings to play Emmitt Thomas, his playing at a high level during those times, especially in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl. Back to you, Harp.
Yeah, Fred Williamson was one of the cornerbacks, Willie Mitchell, Bobby Hunt, Johnny Robinson, and he worked his way into that lineup. You had Bobby Bell, Buck Buchanan was a part of that. Will Lanier would join and eventually be one of those guys that was a perennial All-Pro and a future Hall of Famer. So the defense itself that he was a part of was absolutely fantastic. And his career, Vincent, obviously as a player was something special, but eventually all good things must come to an end. And after 5 Pro Bowl appearances, and he was first team All-Pro in 74, 75, he led the league in interceptions in 72 and 74, blah, 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 blah. So many really cool things that he was able to do. In 1978, he ends up having his last game, hangs up his cleats, so to speak, but then he gets involved with coaching. And it doesn't take him long to realize that, you know what, I want to do this. I want to learn the right way. He goes to Central Missouri State right afterwards. So in 79 and 80, he's there. And then he ends up with the Cardinals as an assistant coach. The Cardinals worked out very well for him. He kind of go through the motions, if you will, and you got to, earn your keep. But eventually he ends up with the Washington Redskins. And what a great matchup that was for Joe Gibbs early in his career, for him to be able to bring in a guy like Emmitt, here, coach my guys, and success follows him on so many different occasions, including 2 Super Bowl appearances.
Well, think about Mr. Joe Gibbs making that decision, which seemed like an A+ decision. But I'm always going to go back to the 86 season, the Super Bowl year with Doug Williams having an outstanding game in the Super Bowl. But it was the defense, man. It was the secondary. If you want to contest me and you want to say, Vincent, you might not be talking with sense, go back to the Minnesota championship game and look how that secondary played that day. Look how that secondary played against Chicago. And Mr. Emmitt Thomas was the coach of that secondary. Dale Green. A guy down there in Tampa that's the head coach, Todd Bowles, that plays safety. A young man that came off the bench that was an outstanding player out of University of Nebraska, Brian Davis. Vernon Dean, a veteran out of San Diego State, was still on that team. The hard-hitting Mr. Alvin Walton out of Kansas.
Yeah.
And most of all, a young man that ended up, I think, making the Pro Bowl, making all-pro first team, and from my hometown, I don't care if y'all get jealous today, the 901 Orange Mile, Father Jesse Wilburn, outstanding legend at Tennessee State, Mr. Barry Wilburn. That secondary played, to me, the most important part of the Redskins winning that Super Bowl that year. Even though Doug Williams had the great game against Denver, but if you go back to the playoffs, look how that secondary played. And the guy that was behind it, the gentleman who we talking about today, the legend himself, Mr. Emmitt Thomas. Back to you, Mr. Harper Lavelle.
Yeah, you mentioned Doug, and then Timmy Smith had a great game, obviously, but you can't win without having a solid defense. And you're absolutely right. The Redskins had it at that year. They also will go to the Super Bowl again, Super Bowl 26. They win that one. My roommate with the Falcons, Brad Edwards, is a part of that team. Another one of those secondaries that, my gosh, the Redskins and their defense was good enough to play against anybody at any time, and they certainly did. So they have the win there against the Buffalo Bills. So 2 more Super Bowls. He's been to 4. He's won 3 of them. Emmitt's got a pretty good percentage going for himself right there. But the coaching side for him, the fun, the experiences aside, yes, there can be some fantastic days. It's tough, though, long hours. And there's a stick-to-itiveness that he had that he was going to help make this team better. Now, that's one of the things that I like most about him. It's not always easy. It affects your family. It affects you in some cases. Some coaches can't do it. They burn out. And Joe Gibbs was one of those guys himself that he had no problem sleeping on the couch in his office and not even going home because he's watching film and getting himself ready for the following day's practice and the following week's games. It is not an easy profession, but Emmitt was a part of it for such a long time as an assistant coach, as a coordinator, and eventually, Vincent, he ends up joining the Atlanta Falcons during a time when they had one of the goofiest people. I'll be kind and just say he was a goofy person, and that's Bobby Petrino. He leaves, and Emmitt is made the interim head coach for the Atlanta Falcons. He goes 1-2 with the Falcons. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a winning record. And hey, when you're talking about the Falcons, there's not a whole lot of guys that do. Mike Smith is really the only one that had, he still has the winningest record with the Falcon organization. But Emmitt gets a chance to shine, and even though it was a great honor, his next coaching gigs were not as a head coach. He goes back as an assistant, and he kind of finds his place there in Kansas City and does a great job there from 2010 to 2018, really helping that organization, turning things around and being a part of that, where his home was, where he started and where he got to make his career as a player. So lots of great things that Emmitt was able to do from the playing side and the coaching side that were very impressive, at least to me. I know a lot of our viewers will agree.
When we think about Emmitt Thomas, think about this. A gentleman that played at a high level on the field, won a Super Bowl championship, then translated that over to being one of the best coaches at a position, the cornerback position, which is highly graded. It's a tough position in the National Football League. But think about it. He played the position at a high level and coached the position at a high level. And his resume speaks volumes. Dale Green. Can't say no more. Hall of Famer. Resume, Super Bowl champion. All-Pro 3 times. Pro Bowl, I believe, 5 times. But most of all, one of the most well-respected guys that came across the face of the National Football League. And it's very amazing to me that a lot of people don't even talk about him. based on what the Kansas City Chiefs are doing right now and having the success they having. They don't mention Emmitt Thomas. But it's something about being blessed when you mention the guys that came before you and set the tone. I just hope one day that the Kansas City Chiefs do that, because I don't hear them mention anything about Emmitt Thomas. And he was the foundation with that Super Bowl 14. Johnny Robinson, Jim Lynch, Lenny Dawson, one of my favorite coaches of all time, Hank Stram, Otis Taylor, Jimmy Marcellus, Buck Buchanan. It can't get no more special than that. It's been a special, special opportunity to talk about one of the best that ever done it, Mr. Emmitt Thomas. Back to you, Mr. LaBelle.
Well, after his head coaching experience there with the Falcons as an interim in 2007, we honor him now for 2008 as a senior. The group that puts the final vote together votes for Emmitt into enshrinement there in Canton, Ohio, as a member of the Hall of Fame. He certainly deserved it. And it was a couple of years after that. So he was out of football after that for a couple of years, back until 2010 when he rejoins Kansas City. But as a Super Bowl champion, as a player, a champion as an AFL player back in 1966 when they won that championship there, as a Pro Bowler, an interceptions leader. He's in the Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Fame as well. His number 18 has been retired, and he wins two more additional Super Bowls as an assistant coach. We honor Emmitt Thomas for all that he did for the game. Final thoughts, Vincent?
What more can you say? Outstanding football player, outstanding coach, played on one of the greatest teams ever to win a Super Bowl championship, the Kansas City Chiefs. Look what the Chiefs are doing right now. Hey, we're very blessed today with Mr. Emmitt Thomas. And to the Thomas family, you should be awfully proud. Back to you, Mr. LaBelle.
Absolutely. A great guy, a super individual. I got to meet him once in a grocery store. Just wanted to shake his hand, if you know what I mean, and just say hello. He was getting groceries, some spaghetti for dinner, and it didn't want to bother him too much, but wanted, if nothing else, just to say hello. And he had just one of those quiet little smiles, like, hey, it's a pleasure to visit with you and talk about some of the great days that he had. I remember at Hacksaw Williamson, and we talked a little bit about that. I got him to giggle a little bit when he talked about how heavy Fred hit, but he said, man, we all did. Everyone did. So that was one of those personal times that you have with somebody, you're in the same room with greatness. And I appreciate that greatly. And we certainly do here at 100 Yards of Football, where every week we want to honor a couple of the great legends of the game. And we did so here today with Emmitt Earl Thomas. We want to say thank you for tuning in, everybody, to 100 Yards of Football. For the co-host, for the founder, Vincent Turner, and myself, Harper LaBelle, we want to say thank you for tuning in. And we hope that everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much.